Welcome, everyone. We are back. We are in season 6, and I am so excited that you've stuck with us this long into this next season. And today's guest is actually a really interesting connection. So, first of all, his name is Bryan Schiller, and he works for the Grammy Museum, which I think is the absolute coolest thing. So, we're going to get into what his job is and what he does there. But how we got connected is we've actually been connected for quite a while via LinkedIn. And I was scrolling through people I was connected with to see if I could bring somebody on. And he was one person whose position stuck out to me. And once we got connected, realized that we actually had a much deeper connection than just LinkedIn. And we went to the same college, so that was kind of the primary connection. And I know he and I both have a lot of mutual connections. And when you go to a small college, sometimes you just accept everybody that goes to that college because, you just kindred spirits. And that's what I thought this was until I got to talk to Bryan and find out that we had actually met multiple times and our paths crossed multiple times. And from that moment, I knew that I had to have him onto the podcast because not only do we have a cool connection story, but where he's at now in his career is also really awesome. So I'm excited for him to share that journey with you. And Bryan, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the podcast and tell your story.
Oh, of course, of course. I mean, it's funny because you're like you said, we had been connected on LinkedIn for so long that I almost had forgotten that we connected before LinkedIn was even a thing, quite frankly.
Right?
You know what I'm saying?
Back in the day, it's been a long time.
Correct, exactly. In fact, I'm curious. I've tried to remember. I try to think back if it was you, based on your recommendation, or my professor's recommendation to create a LinkedIn. Because, obviously in your previous position, you used to set us up with, honestly, like a dummy proof way to land any job interview, quite frankly. Like if you just did what you listed out, like number by number, if you didn't get an interview, that just means you didn't listen, because you like over delivered in what you used to do. And I remember I was just like, I need to figure out how to get a job. And I had buried your packet like in my because it was in my marketing class. I had like buried it in my folder, and I found it, and I was like, it was like this aha, like I found a piece of gold. I was like, yes, I literally was just thinking I want a step-by-step guide.
Yes. And actually, I am the one that created all of those step-by-step guides. So even though it was put out by our office, that was content that I put together because I realized the need for it. I think some students at that time, they could follow a step-by-step process. And if they wanted to come in and talk to us, they could, but they didn't have to. And that's a lot of what I do now too. I provide resources that are step-by-step for professionals. And if that works for them, awesome. If they want to meet with me, that's
Even
cool
better,
too.
right?
Yeah, you got to have options. I think everybody learns in a different way. And so I think that's really helpful. And I think it was probably a combination of your professor and I, because I know her and I were definitely in cahoots in that time. And so we were trying to get students to get on LinkedIn, to get everything in order, because she was seeing the same thing that we were seeing in our office, which was that students weren't as prepared as they needed to be to go out into the world. So I always loved her for that. She was so helpful at preparing you guys and bringing us in to help you. So I'm glad we had that.
Absolutely. So shout out to Professor Bodell, and shout out Julia, because you guys really helped me out. So I appreciate that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yes. Okay. So let's go into a little bit about what you're doing right now, because I think this is so cool. I did not know that a Grammy Museum existed. I feel like it's something I should know, but I didn't.
You're not the only person. Don't worry. That is a very common answer that I get.
So tell me a little bit about what your job is currently, what you're doing now. And I know it's shifted. We'll talk about that, but let's talk about what you're doing right now. And maybe tell us a little bit about the museum as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So currently I am the manager of strategic partnerships, basically meaning I oversee our strategic partnerships and sponsorships for the museum. So the Grammy Museum is actually technically a foundation. So we're the Grammy Museum Foundation. So a nonprofit where obviously we have a physical brick and mortar location, right? So we're located just like right next to the Staples Center. I'm sure most 9 times out of 10 people are like, oh yeah, I've seen the Grammy Museum on my way to a Lakers game or a Kings game or to the Tim McGraw concert, or all of the things that happen at LA Live. But so, and I totally get it, right? Like, that's a difficult pivot, right? You've bought tickets, you're going to an event. Oh, hey, let's blow off the possibly hundreds of dollars that we've planned for this, and let's go check out the museum. So I take it on the chin with that. But the museum itself, it is, like I said, there's the brick and mortar aspect, but there's like 3 other aspects that are really key because we're a foundation. So being a foundation, we have a huge mission in education. So we love to focus on music education, right? The Grammys are all about music. And we believe in providing access to music education because the arts just in general typically doesn't get that much funding. And, if you're fortunate enough to have a school with a music program, chances are statistically you're going to do better in school. That's just what it is. But so we have different programs that show everything about the career paths in music. So like music production, songwriting, sound engineering, and then also, of course, history, right? We're a museum. We're going to talk about music history. So like music that inspired the civil rights movement or the hip hop history and how it started back in the 70s. But then we also, when we're open, because unfortunately we have been closed for over a year now, which, hey, that has been challenging. I think there's like this crazy statistic out there that 1 out of every like 3 or 5 museums are going to remain permanently closed, which is a huge bummer. We're very, very, very thankful that we're not in that position and the light is at the end of the tunnel. So hopefully we'll be opening soon. But it's been great because we also, when we were open, we would host these things called public programs where effectively it was this fusion of interview and concert with everyone from Lady Gaga to John Legend to Ringo Starr, the Beach Boys, Childish Gambino, Taylor Swift, all would come through the museum and do these really intimate concerts. And then the last portion is where foundation. So we'll give out grants to music teachers as well as programs, or I should say high schools and music programs throughout the country, specifically to support music education.
Wow, that's amazing.
Just the museum, and that's just the museum.
That's awesome. Okay, so for those who don't know, my husband, his degree is actually in music education. He spent a couple years teaching band and then shifted into musical instrument repair. And so he actually ended his career at LA Unified repairing musical instruments. But music is such a huge part of our lives. I know, again, my husband, he was in marching band and band. I mean, he did all the band things like all through his education.
That's
so
amazing.
I love hearing that because it's so important. And I was in the arts, I was in band. My dad was an art teacher back when he was teaching. So for us and our family, the arts are so near and dear to our heart, which is probably also why I was interested in having you on, just knowing that Grammy Museum connection. So I love hearing that these types of foundations exist and are helping students and kids just have access to that. That's awesome.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And I did not know that. So there's another wrinkle in it. I love that, Julie. I really do.
Yes.
That's freaking awesome. I bet you at some point your husband probably crossed paths with our executive director of education because he's a former he's worked all over LA Unified as a music professor and a music teacher specifically. So we'll chat offline about that.
That's so funny. Yeah, we'll definitely chat about
Yeah.
that. Okay, so one thing I'm really interested with in your career is how you got to this position, because after our initial chat, the way that you got to this position is absolutely bananas. But
not traditional.
Not traditional. But I love that. I love that because I think that so many people think that there is a straight road to these opportunities. And your story is an example of, no, it's a combination of trial and error and then taking opportunities and, really putting yourself out there. So can you walk us through a couple of the most poignant moments in your career that got you to this place?
Yeah, of course, of course. Yeah, it definitely was not the career that I was preparing for at all. So I came from Northern California. I came out of high school surprisingly with a pretty set plan, which is not normal. I think for a lot, a lot of high schoolers, you're just like, yeah, I'm ready to get out of my parents' house. But I had did explore. I was in the Explorer program for the local police department when I was in high school, and I just thought it was the greatest thing. I mean, I had just mentioned to you earlier that my town has tripled damn near in population since I've left 12 years ago. But at the time, it was this little agricultural community. And I honestly, it was really cool. I was like, all right, I'm going to be in law enforcement. And I talked to a lot of the police officers beforehand, and I said, all right, well, guys, I'm going to college, so I should go get my criminal justice degree, right? Like that makes the most sense. That would be the traditional route. And I'm thankful because they told it to me straight. They're like, no, man, like you're going to get hired as a cop. Like that'll be fine. You don't even need a degree. Usually you just need to graduate high school. They're like, if you really want to go far, go get a degree in business or psychology, because those are going to give you like the skills to move up and not just stay a police officer. So I was like, oh, okay. So my plan was to go to APU, get my business management degree, and then minor in psychology, and then go straight into law enforcement. Well, that certainly did not happen. Had to drop out of APU after my sophomore year or halfway into my sophomore year because my parents had filed bankruptcy and I could no longer afford to go to school. So I pivoted. But it was crazy because right at that time was the same exact time I had lost my job at APU during campus safety. So I got my first experience in getting fired, which I think I don't recommend it. I definitely don't recommend it, but in my case, it really worked out for me. I'm sure you remember at APU, there were chapel, right? You'd get chapel 3 times a week. Well, I was working campus safety one day and my roommate woke up late for chapel, and I happened to be on the campus where chapel was at. And he was like, hey man, fill out my chapel card for me. And I'm not thinking anything of it because I don't have to fill out chapel cards. So I fill out the chapel card. Well, turns out you're definitely not supposed to do that, especially if you're on the job. So I kind of fell flat on my face and then had to leave the school next semester. So to me, it was like a double whammy. But really, Julia, it really put me between a rock and a hard place because everything was telling me, go back home, move back in with your parents, go to community college, save up. And I don't know what it was. It might have been because Citrus was so close and it's right next door. I just said, you know what? I'm going to try to find a job down here and I'll just go to community college. So that was the first transition. So that, like I said, I had wanted to be in law enforcement. So all of my, I was in the Explorer program, working campus safety. I turned that into just a bunch of different security guard jobs. So have tons of experience in security. One of my favorite ones was when I was working mall security over at the Santa Anita Mall, right next to the Santa Anita racetrack. Was freaking awesome. One of the best experiences I can remember is having to work Black Friday. And I kid you not, it literally it's all these glass like windows and everyone just pressed up against the glass, just waiting to come in, looking like something out of The Walking Dead or some type of zombie apocalypse. Scared the crap out of me. But
for those who don't know, okay, Santa Anita Mall is like a really nice mall in the San Gabriel Valley, and it was one of the like more top tier malls at the time. I don't know what it's like now, but at the time it was so popular and so many people went there. So it was like a really high traffic mall, really nice. And I know I have shopped there many, many times. So I'm not surprised.
Awesome. No, that job was awesome. And you're right. Oh my gosh. And like I said, I came from a small far town. So even coming from that to Azusa was a big shift. And then going and working there, that was like, because I thought Azusa was kind of a poppin' place. And I go to Arcadia and I'm like, oh my gosh, there are so many people here. Like part of that job, I also was just directing traffic so people wouldn't hit each other just so they could find parking. But
Right.
anyway, I ended up losing that job as well. I got fired from that. So, you know, you may be saying like, what the heck? Like I said, I do not recommend getting fired, but for some reason it worked out for me. And what ended up happening is I was transitioning back to APU. So I had basically got as much as I could from Citrus. I got all of the classes that would transfer over from a business side. And I ended up getting a degree in criminal justice too, because I thought to myself, well, let me have something in my back pocket just in case I can't come up with the funds to finish APU, which really thankful I did that, because that really gave me the perspective that law enforcement was not the route for me. But we can touch back on that. But the transition from getting fired at Santa Anita Mall is I had moved back into full-time school and they were trying to have me work full-time. And I'm like, guys, it's my senior year. I'm doing like 18, 20 units a semester. I'm definitely not going to be able to work full time for you guys. And, you know, this is a mall security position. And, you know, in law enforcement, there is some law enforcement, there's a certain attitude. I even experienced this in campus safety where it is do what I say. Mm-hmm. Just simple as that. No explanation, just do what I say. Which that naturally never sat well with me because I'm very curious. I'm a curious kid. My mom used to tell me when I was growing up, I'd just walk up to people and say, hey, what's your name? What church do you go to? You know, how tall are you? Like just, so that doesn't go well with me. But I ended up shifting my hours from 40 hours a week, dwindled down to one shift a week. And I ended up being late for that one shift that I had. They basically fired me on the spot. You know, they were already not very happy with what was going on because you know, like you said, it's a really busy mall and they wanted me to work full time. Yeah. So I ended up getting fired twice, but that actually leads me to the next transition, which was the best one of them all, because that's when I was in my marketing class. It was my senior year. That's when I had just attended a presentation at your office, and we had just talked about that handy dandy packet, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna get myself a job here, like. But the classic high school kid, you just write out all your experience in Microsoft Word and maybe remember to put your name on the freaking thing. Didn't put my email, didn't put any contact information, thought it was enough to just put my name on top. And I remember attending an event that was put on with the business school, and I think your office, it was like speed dating with recruiters, effectively. Yep. And I was so excited because I was like, oh, there's this company called AEG that is going there, and they own the Staples Center. They do Coachella. I'm like, that sounds like a great place to work. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know how the event worked. I remember I was coming from class and it was a first come, first serve freaking event. Yeah. So by the time I get there, the only choices that I had were, I think, in-home, like care for like special needs and learning disabilities. Like a missionary company through China that I think built out churches, and then Teach for America. All amazing companies. But quite frankly, that didn't necessarily align with my passions, quite frankly. And I remember being a little disappointed, but I also remember seeing, her name's Whitney. I'm pretty sure you're friends with her. Whitney's freaking awesome.
I am connected with her on LinkedIn, and she will get tagged when this goes live.
No, Whitney's awesome. But I remember with Whitney, I saw her and I just was like, you know what? I'm going to walk up right to her and I'm just going to shoot my shot. Like, what's the worst that can happen? Hey, sorry, I have to leave, right? But no, she was incredibly welcoming and nice and gave me some great advice by saying, contact me. And I'm like, okay, well, how do I do that? And she was like, well, do you have a LinkedIn? And I said, heck yes, I just created one. Well, in my head, I'm thinking I just created one last week based on the recommendation from that packet. Mm-hmm. And that's how she landed me an interview with the Grammy Museum. At the time, I'm stoked out of my mind. I didn't know what the museum was, quite frankly. So that's why I'm not surprised that you hadn't heard about it. I hadn't even heard about it until I started working there. But I ended up getting hired through a temp agency, which at the time, wasn't like, I was just about to graduate college. I'm like, dang, do I really want to go work at a temp agency? But I'm like, you know what? Forget it. Like, shoot, I'm getting my foot in the door with the Grammy Museum. Like, what's the worst that can happen? And that's now I'm here where I'm at today.
Hey there. Yes, I know. I just broke into this interview because I wanted to share something new with you. As you know, I'm a career strategist and coach, and for years I have been helping professionals get to the next step in their career. And one of the resources that I have used consistently is LinkedIn. If you just rolled your eyes at me, hear me out, hear me out. I have a client who started putting in the work to revamp her LinkedIn. She's always had it, but it just wasn't working for her. She wasn't getting recruiters reaching out to her. She wasn't being noticed in her industry. So we honed in on her career goals, transformed her LinkedIn profile, and created a strategy to help her get to the next step in her career. On average, she now gets 2 to 3 messages per month from recruiters wanting her to apply or interview for positions. Whether you are looking for that next position, or you want to be a thought or industry leader, or you simply want to have a more targeted and professional presence, you'll want to check out my new course, LinkedIn Level Up for the Corporate Professional. This course will teach you how to enhance your profile and get noticed by recruiters and hiring managers without having to get a paid account. It's going to teach you how to create and cultivate intentional connections and help you find your voice as a thought or industry leader to get you noticed for more opportunities. This is a strategy I have used throughout my career and I regularly use with clients. I've taken 10 years of teaching clients how to best utilize LinkedIn for their career success and put it into a 30-day course with an hour-long strategy session with me at the end of it. If you want to know more about the course and take advantage of a one-time launch special, I'll leave a link in the blog post to sign up to receive emails. Let's get back to the interview. That's so awesome. Okay, I have to make comments on some of this because your transitions are wild. Okay, so we used to work with LAPD. APU and LAPD used to work together because we had an alum that worked there.
Okay.
And I want to touch on what you were saying because I think this is good information for people to know who might be interested in law enforcement at some point. So you can definitely go into the academy like straight out of high school. You can go
Absolutely.
in. There are some conditions on that, but you do not have to get a degree. However, they want people with degrees. And
Absolutely.
so they were actually, at the time that I worked there, they were coming to college campuses because they wanted to recruit
Oh,
college grads because they wanted to have a force that had a higher level of education. And that's what they were looking for. Also, what it does is if you do, I think, and this was a few years back, so it could have changed by now, but at that time you had to do like 2 years out in the field and then you could transition to
yeah, I
pretty
remember
much
that.
anything. So if you wanted to do HR and you got like a business degree or whatever, if you went and you did your 2 years out in the field, you could transition to HR because you had to be a police officer to transition into those other roles within the police department.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so just fun tip there for anyone maybe considering
No,
law
that honestly,
enforcement.
that is such good information there because that's like I
Yeah.
said, had I not interned at the Explorer program, I probably would have just went in right out of high school because you can. Why
Yeah,
not? There's no barrier to entry. And also
absolutely.
you're 18. You're just getting out of your parents' house. You're ready to dive into anything but what
Absolutely.
you're staying home.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, I so appreciate your level of honesty and vulnerability talking about being fired from positions because I think that's such a taboo topic with people. Like they don't want to talk about times that they were let go, especially if it was their fault. But I think it's important to people's stories to understand that those moments, I think sometimes are the most defining moments. And we're hearing in your story, I think it was almost this like confirmation that that was not the right place for you. You know, it's like, okay, we're letting you go from this one. Now we're letting you go from
Right.
this
And
one.
it's so funny that you said that because it was like in typical form with most people. I'm very type A personality. I'm also very extroverted. I was used to just kind of putting my head down and, you know, just persevering. So I was just like, okay, I got fired here, no worries. Oh, I got fired here, no worries. And then realized like, maybe that door's shutting for a reason. Maybe that's not a fit for you, Bryan.
Right, right. And so now here you are, working this job. I think that's amazing. And I think the other part of that, meeting with Whitney and shooting your shot, I think that's so huge these days. And people, I don't know, they get nervous. They think, "Oh, I don't want to bother them. I don't want to do that."
I feel like that was what it was for me a
Yeah.
lot of the time. It was that what you just said, that it was that internal voice in your head. We all have it, right? Oh, I don't want to be a bother. I don't want to bother them. As if you were, I mean, quite frankly, it's kind of like, to me, that's a little arrogant that you would even be important enough to bother someone if you've never, because that's really what, because you think about it, most of the time when it's a random stranger, you're not bothered by them. You're more bothered by people that are close to you. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
At least in my experience.
Right. And I just love that you talked about that because you never know. And here's the reality. If Whitney didn't want to be bothered, she would have said, "Hey man, you missed your shot. Like you should have met with me back up there." And that's okay too, right? Because you knew, you're like, "Oh shoot, I didn't read the fine print of, of this
Right,
event,"
exactly.
but you still put yourself out there. And I think that is one of the big things that I want people listening to this to understand. You never know. You never know. And right now, we're still in the middle of the pandemic at the time of this recording. And I would say we're like 50-50. Some people are going back to work, some people are still at home.
Yep.
It's kind of all over the place right now, but people still are not socializing in the same way that they were before all this happened. And there's opportunity in that to reach out to people and just connect with people. If you're on LinkedIn and you see someone that you're like, "Oh man, I would love to talk to them,"
You're
reach
gonna have a much
out.
better. You're probably gonna have a much better percentage that they're going to respond right now than ever.
Yes.
Because most people are at home and
Right.
actually paying attention to their LinkedIn,
Right.
right? You know what I'm saying? Not having
Absolutely.
to drive to work or drive to that meeting, or, just be in an office with people where you don't have to formally invite anyone when you need to talk to them. You stand up and you
Absolutely.
walk to them and talk to them.
Yes. Yes. And I think people, I don't know. I had another interview where my guest said, people inherently want to help people. Like, so almost actually, I think every guest that I've had up to this point, like at the end of it, they're like, "Connect with me on LinkedIn. If you want to jump on a
Absolutely.
call, I'll jump on a call with you within reason, obviously." But that's amazing. I think that speaks to people really want to help, but if they're not being asked,
Well, they're
you
not
know,
mind readers. We're not,
yeah.
you can't help what you don't know needs help.
Right. And come with intention. I think that's some of it too. Like you went into it knowing that Whitney was going to be there from AEG. And I think that intention that helps, because I had a similar experience actually in grad school where there was a school that I wanted to work at. And I went to an event specifically to talk to somebody that worked there. And I waited, I waited through so many people to talk to her. And I ended up getting a position there because I was so intentional about wanting that particular school.
It's
And
interesting that you say that, because I think that's also like a nugget right there. Because when you're intentional about something, you're much more likely to be patient for it, right? You're going to have resilience. You're going to have that resilience because your mind is ready to wait, right? Versus if your
absolutely.
mind's not ready to wait, I mean, heck, if you're not in the right environment to wait, everyone knows 9 times out of 10, we're going to just walk away, or like, ah, forget this. You see a
Yep.
line at Chick-fil-A, forget this, I'm out. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yep. Yep.
that
This is
intention.
also why it's so important when you're in your career and you're in a position to also be looking toward the next thing, even if you're not quite ready to move on. It could take you 2 years to really make the connections and build whatever you need to build to get to the next place. And it's so much easier to do that when you can have the patience, to be able to connect with people and go to events and do these different things
Because
versus
you have a North Star, right? Like you
yes,
have that North Star, so you kind of you may not know exactly where you're going to land on the map, but you kind of know which direction you're going. So it's more
absolutely.
likely, to do the stuff that's really not that fun, right?
Right.
Like that's really what it's like. At the end of the day, it's not that fun,
Yes.
to
Yes.
prospect and research, and sometimes you feel a little creepy, quite frankly. You're like, man, I'm just trying to figure out what this person likes, but I mean, at the end of the day, that's going to help you when you talk to them, right?
Absolutely.
Because you're not,
Absolutely.
if your intention is pure and you're not trying to do anything malicious, then they're not gonna care that you research them. They're
Yeah.
gonna like that. In fact,
Yeah.
I encourage you, if you aren't doing your research, that shows to the person that you're trying to get help from that you're not willing to, at least that could give the perception that you're not willing to do your research, which therefore you're not willing to invest in yourself, which then why in the world would I invest in you? Quite frankly, like to an extent.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That was gold right there. Everybody listening. That was gold. Yes, absolutely. Okay. So I'm really so I asked this question of everybody, and I'm really curious for you because of some of your transitions. I would love to know, what are your like top 2 or 3 management tips that you would give to people, either if you have managed people yourself or being somebody that is managed by somebody else? What are kind of your top tips there?
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you gave me 2 options to go from, because I'm going to pull from both of those. I'm going to speak first from being the managed, right? The employee, quote unquote. So my first tip comes from, it said it earlier, that mentality of, that dictator mentality, like you do what I say because I say it. So my tip is be relatable. Like if you're not able to be relatable to your employee, how in the world do you expect them to do what you're going to want them to do if you like they're not relating to you, right? Like it actually can cause resentment, right? Like if as an employee, I can tell you there were times where I was told to do stuff without really being told why or what it was helping or anything. It was just kind of like, well, because I said so. And, that causes resentment, which is never good because that's going to come out in some way, shape, or form,
Yep.
not in a positive manner, typically, right?
Yeah.
On those same lines, along those same exact lines of being relatable, you got to be willing to do the work that you're asking your employee to do, right? Like if you're over here filling up your employee's plate and then they see you kicking your feet up and maybe playing like Facebook games or something like that, and they don't see like you're necessarily doing the grind or the hustle that you're expecting from them, how in the world do you expect them to do it? And they're gonna, that's like the recipe for resentment right there.
Yes.
And then the third tip, it all ties in, is communicate. Even though it may, I mean, to be frankly honest, you may annoy either your employee or your boss may employ and I'm not saying like in a micromanagey way, right? Not like communicate what you want them to do. I mean, communicate so you guys are aligned and on the same page, so that as either a manager, you understand your employee's workflow, right? Because if you don't understand their workflow, you're going to assume they have the same workflow as you. And that's probably not the case, quite frankly. And also the other way around, communicate with your boss so you understand clearly what they're expecting from you when they ask you to do something, right? Because that's gonna, help you to develop some friendly banter, which is all, what you don't have to be friends with your boss, but friendly banter, we can all agree that's nice, right? Rather than just being told what to do and not being felt like you're being heard, right?
Yeah.
So
oh my gosh. Okay, that's awesome. And I will tell you that everything that you're talking about, that's how you keep a high achiever also.
Yes, exactly.
High achievers will peace out on you.
Oh, 100%. You're not listening to me? Why am I staying here? Like, I don't need you guys.
Oh man. Well, and I think the one that hit me is when you were saying if your boss is just, sitting there not doing anything, they're not they're not working and they're watching you work. As somebody who, I think you and I are kind of similar, like type A, high achieving, like we hustle, we go, right? And if I don't see the people above me with that same level of determination and drive, it's frustrating because I'm like,
Mhm.
why am I doing this to make you look good, but you're not doing anything to make yourself look good?
Right,
Come
exactly.
on.
No,
And that's
that
how
you
you
hit it
lose
on the
good
head.
talent. It's how you lose good talent. It's
Yeah, no,
crazy.
I completely agree. You hit it on the head there.
Oh my gosh. Okay. This is one of my favorite questions that I like to ask all of my guests. But tell me about a book that changed your perspective on your career or life.
Oh, so this, I don't know. I mean, this book's incredibly popular. It's like a New York bestseller. But it's not necessarily like a, well, I always get these confused, fiction and nonfiction. I think it's nonfiction. That's like fantasy, right?
Fiction would be fantasy.
Okay, this is more of a fiction book. So
Okay.
it's The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. So that book
Oh,
was, and it's such a short read. Like I said, it's incredibly famous. Tons of people have read it. It's a New York bestseller. But it is about this little shepherd boy named Santiago, and it's all about finding his personal legend. And that just related to me so much because, like I said, I came out of high school like knowing what I thought I wanted to do, my own legacy or my personal legend. I thought it was in law enforcement. And just because I thought that at the time, I was using that, we alluded to having a North Star. That was my North Star, but it wasn't really something I was passionate about, or it wasn't something that was actually a fit for me. So that really helped me understand that, because when you get fired from positions, there, like you said, it's taboo, right? There's
mm-hmm.
this societal pressure to never say anything about it. Don't let anyone know about it. Pretend like it never happened. But I found that to be such terrible advice because what is like the first thing that most recruiters are going to do? They're going to follow up with your previous employer. So if you're not upfront with them ahead of time, good luck getting through even the interview process,
Right.
quite frankly. So I was always upfront about that. And I would even call back to the places that fired me and say, hey, this person's going to check on me. I just wanted to let you know, tell them, tell them what happened. I told them what happened. You
Right.
can be
Right.
like, you don't have to feel like you're bad, which I thought was actually kind of helpful. I don't know if a lot of people do this, but I actually tried to keep in contact with the places that let go of
Mm-hmm.
me because why not? Like, I don't want, you immediately think of fired as the metaphor of a burning bridge. You don't have to burn that bridge. I
Right.
took responsibility for what I did wrong, which I admit was wrong, but I learned from it.
Right.
And I wanted to let those bosses know, like, hey, thanks for keeping me accountable. So to round it back out, the what I love about The Alchemist is it helped me realize that I don't have to fold to societal pressures about what it is that I want to do. And it helped me just realize how to like almost check in with myself, like have like an awareness to an extent and not just always, okay, this is what I said I'm going to do, so I have to do it. It's like, you have to, you can't live in the past, you can't live in the future, you have to live in the present, quite frankly.
Yes, yes. Okay, you're the second person to recommend this book, so I feel like it definitely needs to go on my list
It's
now.
such an easy read though. I'm
That's
telling you.
so
I think
good.
it's less than 200 pages.
Oh my gosh.
So it's
Okay,
like
I'll
you'll
have to
breeze
order it.
through it. You could breeze through it in a weekend if you wanted to.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So here's what I love about this. I think, going back to the being fired thing, I mean, I, I hate that we're focusing on that, but I think this is so important. You made those experiences part of your career story. And I think that's the difference. And I hope that the people who are listening to this understand that whatever happens in your career, not only do you need to own it, and sometimes you need to reframe how you showed up and how other people showed up in that time. But if you can make that a positive part of your career story, even if it was a negative experience, you have the control at that point. You're taking control of your story instead of letting somebody else tell your story. And I think that's exactly what you did. And I think for you and your journey and what you have done, that was the exact right thing to do because that also shows you're teachable, you're learning, there's a high level of integrity there to be honest and not, try to cover things up. And I think that is something that as an employer, they're going to want to they're going to look for, right? And I think the things that you got let go for weren't, it's not like you embezzled money or something,
Oh yeah, I
like
mean, right,
within
exactly.
reason.
At the time with the chapel card thing, I felt pretty bad about it, but that's another story.
Well, those who don't understand private Christian education, that was basically like, felt like jail time when you were going to
Right,
chapel and you did something wrong. Like it was not good. So
right, exactly, exactly.
oh my gosh. Okay. So we've talked a lot about your journey and your career, and it is so obvious that you have really, even amidst some of the confusion and not sure where you were going, you still took control of what you could where you're at. And that is one of the things with my coaching and my business that I am all about. I want people to take control of their career. So I would love to know, in your career up to this point, tell me about a time where you really felt like you took control.
Ooh, I kind of want to do a couple, but I'll start with. Hmm. Well, I mean, I kind of already, one was when I took control by talking to Whitney and just going through the whole process of, just like I said, getting fired. And then I was like, you know what, screw that. And it turned into a great job at the Grammy Museum. But I'll continue that story. So I got hired by the temp agency, right? And this was going into my senior year at APU. And I was a part-time security guard. The boss was very, very upfront that my sister went to APU. That's why I gave you the interview. That's literally what he told me. So I'm like, oh, score APU, like, let's go. And then
Score one for nepotism. It's
right,
fine.
exactly. And then he followed that up by saying, oh, by the way, this is a 3-4 month gig. You're just covering someone who's on maternity leave. And I'm like, oh man. So that's why I was kind of like, do I even want to take this job? Right? Like there was that contemplation, but then I realized, screw that. At the time, it was my senior year. Everything was get an internship, get an internship, get an internship. Well, at the time, this was when, the laws were a little different, where most internships were unpaid, right? So you were just volunteering your time. So I saw this as the opportunity of, shoot, at least this is going to be a paid internship, right? I had said I wanted to get my foot in the door at AEG. The Grammy Museum wasn't necessarily the thought process that I had in mind, right? I was thinking Staples Center, Coachella, like sports, concerts. And I ended up, working for, 30 hours a week, walking the floors of a museum. I mean, quite frankly, though, that's where I really did take control, because there was, I'm working security. I already have decided I do not want to do law enforcement at this time, right? Mm-hmm. So I could have had the thought of like, all right, well, this is a museum. I'm going to just be walking the floors and that's it. You know what I'm saying? Looking for my next gig, or I'm in a freaking museum. I might as well learn, So that's where I first learned about the Beatles. There was an awesome Ringo Starr exhibit there. I learned about Jenny Rivera, this lady who passed away from, she was here in Long Beach, but one of the biggest regional Mexican artists ever. I learned about Frank Sinatra. You can actually see it in my background, but I'd already grew up like loving music. I always had loved it. Like growing up, my parents would always be playing everything from Kool and the Gang to Tim McGraw to Eminem to Queen to Foreigner. So I had a very eclectic, and also gospel music, so like Kirk Franklin, all that stuff. So I had a very eclectic taste. I never was a musician though. So, and in my mind, it was like, oh, you can only, music only is for musicians or singers, right? Like I can sing in the shower fairly well. I memorize lyrics very well. They just don't sound that great coming out of my mouth. But that was the first kind of intro to be like, oh, wow, I could actually see a career here at the Grammy Museum, because I'm like, one, it was just cool. The entry point was the museum itself, but then I learned about the foundation side and all of the actual like music education work that they were doing as the nonprofit. And that's where I was like, oh, like this is actually like, it is making an impact. It's not just like a tourist trap. Because you know what I'm saying? Because like, and no disrespect at all to any attraction. I'm a huge Disneyland fan. I love, the good old Ripley's Believe It or Not. Those are amazing. but that's not necessarily, they're not necessarily known for their impact, right? Like that's not their primary function. They're for profit most of the time. So that was really my intro to nonprofit. So what happened was, I just was like, I don't care that you told me that this is a temp job. I'm going to get hired. So it ended up after the 3-month temp job, they hired me on part-time. And I kid you not, I was like, well, I'm going to learn about and that's one good thing about nonprofits. I really want to say this. In nonprofits, you can definitely wear different hats. Yes. They will welcome you to wear different hats and do different functions and do different jobs. Because quite frankly, a lot of the time, the budget isn't there to necessarily hire a full-time person for each position. So sometimes you're managing different roles. So I saw that with a lot of the full-time employees. And, my job was just to be there at the museum. Museums don't necessarily have a ton of crazy stuff happening at them, which is a good thing, right? Yeah. But I would help out with the curatorial team, with the marketing team, with the events team. I was just like, oh, you need help? Like, let me help. Let me learn about the function of the business itself, right? Because what better way to learn than actually just helping the person that's doing the job? So I effectively turned that temp job into like 6 different internships because I was just helping out with all of these different departments. But I remember it very vividly. So that went on actually for a 2-year period. So thank goodness I was getting paid, but I mean, thank goodness the laws changed, because I can imagine interns and how upset they would be putting in that much time and effort and then not getting hired. It's like, you almost feel betrayed to an extent. You know what I'm saying? You're like, oh, like I got to know you. Like we were friends and you're just telling me that bye, like you're like, you don't want me to stay around. And that's kind of how I was starting to feel. And that's just how it is in nonprofits too, because quite frankly, if the budget's not there, they can't hire the position, right? Yeah. They can't just manufacture money out of the nonprofit, right? Like you can't make profit. You can only your expenses, but we're getting to legal stuff there. But I remember I was on the golf course. I was on the golf course in Pasadena, and I was thinking about making a transition. I already was thinking about it. I was like, man, I'm gonna go, and this is gonna sound crazy. I don't know if we talked about this, but I was thinking I was gonna go teach English in South Korea, because I was like, I can make more money teaching English in South Korea. They'll pay for my room and board. How cool would that be, right? Like, I don't know why I chose South Korea. I think I did it just because they were really easy to get a job if you had a 4-year degree. Mm-hmm. So I was all set. I'd gone through the interview. I had gotten accepted. I was just getting my TESOL certificate, basically. And then I was going to ship out the next summer. Well, I got an email on the golf course from our COO saying that there was a position opening up in group sales, but it wasn't with the museum. So I was really confused. It was like, you're going to do group sales for the Grammy Museum, but you're not going to be at the museum. You're going to move over to Staples Center. So I'm like, well, I've never done sales, but remember, the whole reason I even wanted to get into AEG was because live sports, live entertainment. So all of a sudden, this thing that I had originally got into the Grammy Museum for, I kind of had given up on, right? Because I'm like, well, shoot, I can see a career here at the Grammy Museum. And I'm like, all right, I'm going over to the Staples Center. And at least that was my thought process. I had 0 experience in sales. And it's funny because I had applied at like 4 different positions at the museum while I was still working security that I really had no business applying for. It was like curator of exhibits, like director of membership, like copyright editor. And it's like, I studied business, like none of these non-relatable skills any way, shape, or form. I'm like in the interview trying to tell them why my security guard jobs gave me the experience necessary, because they were nice about it. They at least interviewed me,
Oh, that's
so I'm kind of a little PTSD. I'm like, man, I've already gone through so many interviews. You know what? Forget it. This is going to be a sales position. I didn't even know what sales was. It fits my talent set very well. Like I basically walked in there and told them, I've never done sales, but I can tell you what the Grammy Museum looks like from front to back, because I've been walking through it for the last, 2 years. So, you guys, I believe you guys can probably teach me how to do sales, but I know that you won't be able to teach anyone the Grammy Museum knowledge like me. And from there, they said yes. And I worked at the Staples Center for like 3 years. And that was
my gosh,
an amazing opportunity.
That's so awesome. Okay, I love this. I love this because again, it's looking at your opportunities and shooting your shot at all these positions you have no business doing.
Right? I was like, I know that they're not going to hire me, but I'm showing, because that's another thing. You got to be vocal. If you want to move up in any way, in any point in your career, how in the world is anyone going to know unless you
Yeah.
tell them? Like, they're not just going to see that you work hard and think you want to work, like, go
Right.
up. They're just going to be like, oh, I can rely on this person. Like maybe
Right.
I'll give them some more work, actually.
Right, right. Yeah, and I love that because it's making it known, And I think sometimes what happens too as professionals, like we think that we deserve a certain position or we think that we're going to get a certain position. I've been in that position before. I have a lot of clients that have been in that position. And if you don't get it or somebody tells you, oh, I don't think you're the right fit. I don't think you have the right experience, the way I look at it now, which is not how I used to look at it when I was in it, but the way I look at it now is, you know what? That's a blessing in disguise because that was not the right position for you. Because do you want to be in a position working for somebody that doesn't want you there? And in your case, to be fair, you weren't qualified for those
Yeah,
positions
no, yeah,
anyway.
yeah, no,
But
exactly. But
you
that's
also
that's all
you
right.
Right. And you used your skill set that you knew you had to get the sales position. And you're absolutely right. There's such a difference between what is the knowledge that I have that's going to be really hard for somebody to teach versus what can I actually be taught. And something like the sales process, like a skill set, that can be taught. But walking the Grammy Museum for 2 years and knowing the exhibits like the back of your hand, that is something that would take someone months to really know. And you're connected to it already. They saw your passion for it already. And I think that you positioned yourself so well and you were patient when you were working through that.
I didn't feel like I was patient though. I'll tell you what, because like I said, I mean, I say be vocal, maybe don't do it the way that I did it, because I basically was like every paycheck, like, hey, so what's up? You got a position and open it up for me? Like, oh, hey, you want to give me, like, I was the king of overtime. I was like, oh, I'll get some overtime. I'll take that. I'll do that, which,
But here's the thing, if they didn't like you, they wouldn't have entertained any of this. And
oh,
I think that's the key. I think it's a level of self-awareness too of going, you know what? I'm not being like fully rejected as a person here, so I'm just going to keep going.
right, exactly. I was like, they're not going to fire me for trying to help, right? Like, if anything, they're just going to say, no, I don't need your help,
Right.
right? Like, that's the worst that could happen. No, I don't need your help. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Oh my
Well,
gosh.
Michael Jackson exhibit.
Oh man. Brian, this has been so awesome. This has been such a great interview. I loved hearing your story and all the twists and turns that your career has taken up to this point. And I know you have so much more life left to live. So there's going to be a lot more stories in the future, but this is so awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your story with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Like I said, you helped unlock the memory that was that story just by reaching out to me. Because then all of a sudden, like I said, all of the memories just started flooding back. But no, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
That's amazing. And if anybody wants to get connected to you, how can they connect with you? What's the best way?
Oh yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn, Bryan Schiller. It's Bryan with a Y and Schiller, like the word chiller, but with the S in front of it. And
Awesome. And I'll link that into the blog post for this episode so people have that direct link to you as well. So again, thank you so much. I'm happy to have you here.
absolutely, thank you, and thank you to everyone listening.